they don't just deal with heavy traffic. Indonesia's motorcycle taxi drivers are also battling low fares and loose regulation of ride-hailing firms. They're frustrated about their working conditions.
We are workers who need to be protected. Why do they only see us like dairy cows, just for harvesting milk? The longer we work, the lower our pay becomes, yet our living costs are getting higher.
Around 1,500 drivers for Malaysia's ride-hailing firm Grab and Indonesia's Gojek have gathered outside Parliament in Jakarta. They're demanding legal and social protections and higher pay. It's the second protest in 2 months, as drivers say their requests have fallen on deaf ears.
Yes, I admit when I first joined the company, our income was better compared to the past. But as time went by, the changes in fares haven't met the drivers' demand, which is 29 cents per kilometre. In fact, now it is worse than before.
The current rate is 11 cents per kilometre, but the drivers want an increase of 150%. Ride-hailing startups like Grab and Gojek have been locked in price wars to gain market share in Southeast Asia's $20 billion market. But as global competition between the services keeps intensifying, so do protests. And it's not only drivers for ride-hailing apps who complain. Vietnamese drivers for Uber and Grab went on strike in January. Many said they could lose their cars after commissions had been increased without consulting drivers. Last month, drivers for Uber and local competitor Ola went on a nationwide strike in India. They say low pay has left many drivers in huge debt. And traditional taxi drivers were on strike in Turkey last month. It's one of the latest in a series of international and sometimes violent protests against competition from Uber. From South America to Europe, taxi drivers around the world have been fighting Uber-like business models for years. They argue the apps are bypassing licensing and regulation, which leads to unfair competition. And with complaints not only from traditional taxi firms, but also within the ranks of drivers for app-based services themselves, it seems the debate over car-hailing technology still has a long road ahead. Liz Maddock, TRT World.
Santosh Rao joins us now from New York. He's the head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners, a merchant bank. Santosh, great to have you on the show, as always. Let's talk about what's happening in Southeast Asia. Now, Uber's departure from that part of the world showed how tough a market that is. But the domestic firms are also facing the same problems. In other words, low margins, long break-even horizons. Does that essentially mean that they are kind of going to go the same way as Uber in that part of the world?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this whole ride-hailing market is still in a flux. It hasn't found its equilibrium yet. There's a big battle between the drivers, how much commission you pay out to them and how much you keep. So I think that'll take its course. I think initially the whole thing was to get out there, get market share. The business model was not sustainable. They were paying out 80 cents on a dollar to the drivers and really keeping very little. So the drivers had initially, they had enough money to go around. But now as the pressure to show some profitability and as the industry has anchored itself and has shown that it's not going anywhere, people need it, it's become part of the lifestyle, the companies, Ubers and Lyfts and other companies, have some leverage on their side. They're going to demand more. They're going to start paying out less. And that's what's happening. The drivers cannot sustain themselves. The easy money is gone. So I think we have to see how the regulations and everything plays out and where the right balance is. Because if they pay out more and more, the model is not sustainable. If they pay out less, the drivers are not happy. So it's still in a flux. We'll see where it settles. That's why you see all this move towards autonomous cars and to try to eliminate the driver costs. So there's a lot of movement going on there just to eliminate the biggest cost that these companies have.
So the drivers in the whole model are essentially a stopgap before they ultimately go completely autonomous. That's the plan by what it looks like. But look, you mentioned regulation, and I think that's probably absolutely crucial. A good example is, I think, what happened last year in Europe, where they deemed Uber to be a transport company, and so they could be regulated as a transport company and not a tech company. Are you expecting something similar to happen in Southeast Asia?
Yes, I think some shades of that will come there as well. I think even in Europe, I think Uber is appealing the decision, if I'm not mistaken. But I think ultimately you will see some movement towards that, more fairness to the drivers. But, you know, we've done a lot of extensive research. We have research reports on Uber and Lyft, and we've looked at the US market very closely. We found that it's really difficult to make a sustainable living being an Uber driver. Unless you're a full-time and more, 40 hours and more, it's really tough because you have to pay for everything. So it's not really, it's a good supplemental income, but as a primary source of income, it's still very difficult to make a living. So I think that point has to be established. I think emerging markets, people came in when they saw the incentives, but now the incentives are going away. So I think it's getting tougher and tougher. So the regulations have to catch up.
Talking about Southeast Asian cities, and we're almost out of time, Santosh, do you think the long-term infrastructure solution is, the long-term transport solution, is ride-hailing, or is it greater investment in infrastructure?
Yeah, well, a combination of both. I think ride-hailing is here to stay. I mean, it's almost having like a chauffeured car at your service. So I think that's not going away. We are too spoiled now. So I think at some point, either the model has to give in and they lose their profitability and all the big car companies, the other traditional car companies, buy these guys out, or the other way around. So it's really, like I said, it's still in a flux. It'll take another 2-3 years before we see a nice equilibrium in terms of where it's going to settle.
Santosh Rao, Manhattan Venture Partners, thank you so much.